Aloha and good morning, everyone. My name is Madeline Longoria Garcia, and I'm with Pacific Coffee Research in Kailua Kona, Hawaii. And I'm happy to introduce a really couple of great people here who are going to give us a lot of great information about the situation in Hawaii with coffee leaf rust and provide a lot of just background information so that we as a whole community can better understand it, which will then better help us to manage it and take the correct actions in moving forward. So first up, we are going to have Jacques Avelino. Jacques is from France. He holds a PhD in plant pathology from the University of Orsay in Paris. His PhD thesis was on the epidemiology of coffee leaf rust in Honduras. He works for the Agriculture Research Center for International Development, also known as CIRAD, and has been posted at, has been based at the Tropical Agronomic Research and Teaching Center in Costa Rica since 2007, which is also known as CTAHR. So I'm going to give it away to Jacques here to go ahead and talk. How we're going to do this is Jacques will go ahead and do his presentation, and then we'll have 15 minutes set aside for Q&A after his before moving on to Andrea. All right. Also, feel free to use the chat box throughout, and I will take note of questions that are coming up throughout the presentation as well. Thank you. And go ahead, Jacques.
Okay, thank you. So I will share my screen first. It looks like something is already shared. I don't know what. Okay, it's working. Thank you. So give me a while. Okay. It's coming. Can you see my screen? Hello?
Yes, Jacques, we can hear you.
Thank you very much. So thank you for this invitation to this meeting. And we'll take this opportunity to share part of my knowledge on coffee rust. As Madeleine told you, I have been working on coffee rust for many years, for 34 years. You can hear that I am French, so sorry for this complicated accent. I hope you will be able to understand me. In this presentation, I will talk about some biological and epidemiological aspects of the coffee rust. I hope that will help you to better understand this disease and to fight it. As you know, coffee rust is caused by a fungus named Hemileia vastatrix. Here we have some photos of the disease. Here, this is a typical lesion of coffee rust, circular, orange in the center because covered of spores, the spores of the infectious entities of the fungus that will cause new infections. And at the periphery, we have an area, a yellow area. So it's a very typical lesion that you can find on the underside of the leaves. When there are many lesions, they unite and they can cover almost all the leaf area, or a great part, a large part of the leaf area, as you can see here. Coffee rust is able to cause us very severe defoliations, as you can see in these two photographs. Can you see my arrow? Yes? Can you see when I am indicating the pictures? Okay, thank you. So coffee rust is able to cause very severe defoliations, as you can see here. And these photos were taken during the big epidemic that hit the whole Central America, the Caribbean and Mexico in 2012, with similar impacts in the whole region and very heavy losses. So this is a very serious disease. A few words on the coffee rust life cycle. The dust you see on my fingers here are the spores of the fungus. They can be released easily from the leaf. Here we have one spore a very typical spore. It is a very small, around 25 micrometers only. And the shape is also very typical, half smooth ventrally, and the half with some structures like thorns. The spore will have to infect the leaf, has to be deposited on the side of the leaf, where it will germinate. Here we have a germinative tube, and it will the fungus after germination will penetrate the leaf through a stoma. This is a stoma, which are only on the side of the leaf. So that is why the penetration of the lesions can be seen on the underside of the leaf. The stoma is a natural opening of the leaf, and it uses this natural opening to penetrate the leaf. Then the fungus colonizes the leaf tissue. The fungus, this is very important, cannot survive without the coffee leaf. It is an obligate parasite. So it needs the leaf to survive and to reproduce. Here so are the first symptoms, small yellowing spots. These lesions will grow and sporulate through stomata again, as you can see here. This is the sporulation through the stomata of the leaf. And this sporulation occurs between 10 days and 3 months after the beginning of the germination in natural conditions, depending on the weather conditions, no? Temperatures and wetness, basically. Something important, the shorter the cycle, the more severe or the more intense the outbreak. Now, a few words on the factors affecting this life cycle. Wind and rainfall, by shaking or impacting the leaves, can contribute to spore dispersal. But possibly the main dispersal agent during the harvest is people, who transport the spores from tree to tree within the farm and from farm to farm within the landscape. So something very important is to have very low rust incidences just before the harvest time. Fungicides can help to maintain low rust levels. Normally with systemic fungicides, which are used in Central America very commonly, sprays are necessary each time coffee rust incidence reaches 5 to 10% of affected leaves, based on a monthly monitoring. So you have to monitor your plot in order to assess the level of rust. And depending on the level of rust, apply the fungicides. The deposition of the spore on the coffee leaf depends on the quantity of leaves available. The denser the coffee plot, the more likely that a released spore will be deposited on the coffee leaf. Low light and or absence of light are better for fungus germination, penetration into the leaf, and colonization. However, something that you have to know is that there are many opposed effects of light, of shade on coffee rust, and it has been demonstrated that coffee leaves exposed to sun are more susceptible to rust than those that are shaded. So there are opposed effects. Shade favors the pathogen, but light, but shade increases the resistance of the coffee tree to rust. So opposed effects, and the balance of these effects is not easy to make. But we will see that deeper when talking about shade effects. We need wetness for the germination until the penetration. And there are temperature requirements requirements too for germination and colonization. And the optimum is around 23 degrees Celsius. I know that you're not using these units. We have different units. I will talk about meters, Celsius and degrees Celsius and maybe hectares. But 23 degrees Celsius is a very warm weather, so climate. So it is this is the optimum of temperature for coffee rust. We don't know exactly why, but there is an effect of fruit load on the coffee rust, and this is a very important factor that we'll see in the next slide. The high fruit loads increase the susceptibility of the leaves to the fungus. There is also another factor that influences penetration and colonization. It is soil humidity. The high soil humidity is propitious to the penetration, maybe because there is more transpiration and the stomata remain open more time under this condition. Resistance, coffee resistance to rust has also effects on rust. There are different kinds of resistance to coffee rust, which are expressed at the penetration stage or the colonization and sporulation stages. Finally, we don't know really what are the factors that affect sporulation, but we know that there are coffee rust spores can be parasitized by another fungus. You can see in this photo the white fungus on the coffee rust. This fungus is Lechinacillium lecani, which grows on the spores. And an insect, specifically the larvae of this insect, here the little worms that I can see here in this photo. This insect is a fly, and the larvae feed on the spores. I have to say that after the big epidemics that we experienced in Central America, we found plenty of these larvae that maybe helped us to regulate the rust after the big epidemics. So now in this slide, I would like to present a tool which is a result of a study conducted in Honduras, where we studied at the same time many factors affecting coffee rust in order to rank these factors according to their influence on the incidence of the disease. You can consider this tool as a decision tree, which allows the user to assess the predisposition of a coffee plot to rust attack as a function of the most important factors. And when the spot is green, that means that the risk is low. When the spot is yellow, that means that the risk is medium. And when the risk is high, we have a red spot. The factor we found to be the most important one for explaining rust incidence was the yield potential assessed around 2 months after blossom. With less than 230 fruiting nose per coffee tree, we found that the risk to have an intense coffee rust epidemic was low. As you can see, the spot is almost green. On the contrary, with more than 230 fruiting nose per coffee tree, the risk was higher. You can see that in the spot there is red and yellow. There's green, but also these two colors, which means that the risk is higher. But I forgot to say that most of the plots that had low yields or low fruiting or low number of fruiting nose per coffee tree were under dense shade. So this is one effect of shade that helps to regulate coffee rust by regulating the yield. So the risk is higher with the number of fruiting nodes per coffee tree is high, but this depends on if the plots were fertilized or not. When not fertilized during the year, the risk increases. As you can see, there is more red in the spot. We know that fertilization helps to the branch growth, and that contributes to the dilution of the disease due to the incorporation of a high number of healthy leaves along the year. The consequence is that the branches of the well-fertilized plants are not completely invaded by the disease, and they don't die so fast, so the losses are reduced. A good fertilization could also help leaves to resist better, but we will see that later. On the third level of this decision tree, there is the elevation, the plot elevation. And at low elevations, we found that specifically below 1,100 meters of elevation, we found higher risk for coffee rust epidemics. This threshold is now has evolved due to the increase of temperatures in Central America. The threshold now is more or less 1,400 meters. So there is higher now. For your information, the coffee crop in Central America, coffee can be grown until 2,000 meters of altitude, of elevation. So this is a medium altitude, actually, 1,000 medium high altitude, 1,400 meters. Possibly in Hawaii, the risk of having high intensity coffee rust epidemics will be reduced above 800 or 900 meters of altitude because the latitude is higher. On the other side of the tree, there is the shade cover. When with a high number of fruiting nodes per tree, with no fertilization and high shade cover, the risk is higher. And here you can see the opposed effects of shade. Remember, I said that here we had many plots which had low yield, which had low yields that were under dense shade. But when the yield is enough, the shade promotes coffee rust because the microclimate is better for the pathogen. So there are opposed effects, and that is why it's very difficult to have a single response about the shade effects on coffee rust. Finally, in the last level of the tree, there is a soil acidity. And we found that acids, when soils are acids, the risk of having an intense epidemic of coffee rust is higher. So we don't know exactly the mechanism, but something that you can remember is that the stresses, all the stresses weaken the coffee plant. And for instance, the high fruiting or high yielding plants or acid soils are stresses that will weaken coffee plant and possibly will predispose the coffee plant to be attacked by the coffee rust. So something important here is that you can see that local factors are very important, and it is very probable that in Hawaii you will have very many differences of rust attacks depending on the locations and on the management. This tool can be used to identify risk domains and give control recommendations in relation with the expected risk. With low risks, for instance, like here in green, we have we need less fungicides, and when the risk is medium here or high in red here. In this slide, we have an illustration of the effects of elevation, rainfall, and of the harvest period on the coffee rest progress curve. We have 3 curves, an orange one, a dark one, and a gray one, which correspond to different altitudes. This orange curve corresponds to a high altitude plot, 1,100 meters. This work was done in Mexico almost 30 years ago. This plot is a medium altitude plot, 730 meters of 730 meters of altitude, and this one is a low altitude plot, 460 meters of altitude. We can see, as I mentioned before, that there is more rust at low altitude. This is the curve which reaches the highest incidences is this one, and it corresponds to the low altitude plot because of the warmer temperatures, as already said before. The bars represent the rainfall, the monthly rainfall. And you can see that at the beginning of the rainy season, the growth of the epidemic is very slow. And then around the middle of the rainy season, the epidemic grows fast to reach a maximum at the end of the rainy season, and sometimes including even in the dry season. So, this is the case of the high altitude plot. And then the epidemic decreases. And this is logical because the fungus needs water for completing its life cycle. And after that, we are entering the dry season, and there are no conditions for infection. It is interesting to see that a high rainfall does not necessarily mean more rest. As you can see here, the rainfall was very high, more than 1 meter of rainfall in only 1 month in September in the high altitude plot, but there is no more rest in this plot because the temperatures are low, and the development of the rest is slower too. So, something important to understand is that heavy rains can also contribute to wash the spores. As I said, Hemileia vastatrix is an obligate parasite. It cannot live without living leaves. So any spore that will not find the coffee leaf and that reaches the ground due to washing, for instance, by rains, is lost for the growth of the epidemic. It will die. Finally, something also very important, I believe, on the top of the figure, you can see the period of the harvest in each plot, according to its color. And you can see that the coffee rest maximum is almost always reached at the end or towards the end of the harvest. For instance, this one here, this one at the end of the harvest, and this one also at the end of the harvest. And this is in part because people harvesting coffee contribute to spread the disease. And when the harvest ends, so there is the spread also is reduced. So very important to understand that people harvesting coffee are contribute to the dispersal of the disease. But this cannot be avoided. It's obviously. So the solution is to have very healthy leaves before the harvest in order to have a lower increase of the epidemic during the harvest. Have a look now at the effect of the food load on the coffee rest. In this figure, I have represented the level of the infection at the end of the harvest as a function of the food load, which was estimated at the beginning of the rainy season. The food load here is the ratio between the number of fruits and the number of young leaves at that time in June. And the rust is assessed 6 months later. So you can see these data are per coffee plant. You can see there is a positive relationship. The higher the fruit load, the higher the incidence. In this photo I took in Costa Rica in January 2013, so after the first big epidemic, after harvest, you can see on the left side a coffee plant with a good foliage. This plant was a low yielded plant. And on the right side, there is a taller plant, very defoliated, because it was a high yielded plant and coffee rust attacked it more. In this figure, we have the coffee rust progress curves in 2 plots at 2 different elevations. The dotted line is the curve obtained in a high elevation plot, 1,100 meters of altitude, and the continuous line was obtained in a low elevation plot, 560 meters of altitude. This is a 4-year study, as you can see, but not very recent, about 30 years before. As expected, we had higher incidences at low altitude due to warmer conditions. But the interesting thing here is that the epidemic has a very characteristic behavior over the years. 1 year we have an intense epidemic, and then a lower incidence in the following year, and again an intense epidemic. We call that a biennial behavior. This is because yield has also a biennial behavior, and after a year with a high yield, we normally have a year with a low yield. And with a higher fruit load, there is more rust, as indicated before. So the rhythm of the biennial behavior of yield is specific to each plot. You know that. So as a result, we can have similar attacks despite very different elevations due to fruit load differences like here. Very similar here. Now the effect of shade. As I told you, shade effects are on coffee rust are not very clear. Actually, in the literature, it is possible to find results that show that shade is conducive to coffee rust, other results that show that shade has no effects, or that shade hampers coffee rust. So very different results. But why these differences? Actually, we think that these results are all valid. These results mainly show that shade effects are very complex. And this is because shade can impact coffee rust through the pathogen, through the coffee tree, and through natural enemies. And some of these effects are opposed. I talked about that before. There are effects that favor coffee rust, the plus signs in this table, another that hamper coffee rust, the minus signs in this table. And there are also interactions, mainly with meteorological variables. Here the plus and minus signs together. And shade are the sum of these effects. So the balance is therefore very unsure. And in addition, something very important, not all shade trees are equivalent. Shade effects depend on tree species, their traits, shade cover, their spatial arrangement, the number of strata, and maybe other things that we have not identified yet. But in general, shade helps to fight coffee rust because it reduces the fruit load and coffee leaf susceptibility to rust. But dense shade has to be avoided. One effect of shade, for instance, we talked about that also, is to regulate yield. Under shade, we don't have yields as high as at full sun exposure. Coffee rust incidence decreases through this mechanism. This is possibly the main mechanism of rust regulation by shade. However, if fruit loads are similar, as in this trial we conducted in Costa Rica, where we homogenized fruit loads in full sun exposure here in yellow and under shade in green, we found more rust under shade. So you can see in this figure that represents shade effects on a variable based on coffee rust incidence, that the green bar is higher, the shade condition is higher than the yellow one, the full sun conditions. And we verified that microclimatic conditions were better for coffee rust under these shade conditions compared to full sun. Temperatures were buffered, were regulated, and wetness was higher under shade, and that is favorable for rust infection. Finally, I would like to talk about nutrition effects. A recent study in controlled condition in the lab under different light and nitrogen conditions showed that nitrogen helps reduce the number of spores produced per square centimeter of leaf. As you can see in this figure. Just have a look at the Catura curve, this one. Okay. The nitrogen followed by the plus sign means that the plants were fertilized with nitrogen. Okay. And the high light intensity, the yellow sand, or under low light intensity, the dark sand, the black sand. And they found that when nitrogen is applied independently of the light condition, the number of spores produced is very low compared with the spores that are produced when nitrogen is not applied. The worst condition is when plants were exposed to light and with no nitrogen. So possibly because the leaves are more susceptible with high light intensity. Now, just a short conclusion, and I have spent all my time. I would like you to remember that coffee rust impact in Hawaii will not be uniform. It will mainly depend on elevation and management. So do not excessively fear the disease, but you need to be prepared. There are means to manage coffee rust. Good nutrition is a key action. Soil acidity correction, moderate shade is useful. But also fungicides and of course resistant varieties. You possibly will have to analyze the opportunity to use resistant varieties. This could be the subject of another presentation we might have later if you wish in another webinar. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jacques. There were quite a few questions that came through your presentation, and I've marked several of them here. And so I'm gonna just kind of scroll through these. One that came up was, actually, does spraying for coffee berry borer using Bavaria help or hurt, or is there an optimal mix of treatments and fungicides to use for that? Because we've been dealing with CBB here for over 10 years. And
yes, of course.
I don't know if there is any.
It's a good question. Of course, fungicides will affect Bavaria bassiana. So you cannot mix both sprays. And you have to separate the sprays, and maybe the frequency maybe you need to alternate Bavaria bassiana and fungicide sprays. I'm not sure when you spray Bavaria bassiana in what is the months. The sprays for coffee rust are during the beginning of rainy season until the onset of the harvest. So, it is based on the monitoring. So, if as I said, you plan to spray Bovera bassiana at the same time in the same period, there can be an interference between both sprays. So it is better to have some time between fungicides and Bovera bassiana sprays.
Okay. And then this other question that we kind of briefly discussed in a previous conversation, Jacques, was the difference of temperature for elevation in Hawaii versus most other producing regions that are closer to the equator. So above 1100, 1400 meters here, most people aren't producing coffee just because it is so cold. And so we are, what did I say? It was like we're over 19 degrees north as our latitude. And so there were some questions about is the correlation of altitude more to do with temperature than the actual altitude? And what are those?
Yeah.
Can we just maybe repeat the optimal temperature ranges?
The optimal for coffee rust is about 23 degrees Celsius for germination and also for pollinization. It's almost the same. And of course, the effect of altitude is related with the effect of temperature. And at high altitudes, there is no rust, or almost no. So I believe that in your islands, probably above 900 meters, maybe 800 meters, the incidence of coffee rust will be low, and it will be very manageable with a small number of fungicides eventually, but maybe even with only one or something like that. It is interesting to see that, for instance, in Central America, this relationship has changed a little bit since the increase of we had increases in temperatures. The very low plots now are not so favorable to coffee rust because it is too warm. So too warm or too cold is not good for coffee rust. And there is an optimum of temperature, which is about 23 degrees Celsius. And normally, you can find these temperatures around, I don't know where in your islands, but where you found these temperature in the altitudes where you found these temperatures were very favorable to coffee rust.
Just to let everybody know, Celsius is roughly 73 degrees Fahrenheit. And the topic of shade is often, as you said, pretty complicated and
yes,
varied. But there was a question about if there's any data on what type of shade trees work best, if there are ones that are more favorable than others. The question was native or Inga, and if there's some sort of strategy or model.
Actually, we are working on that, and we think that there are not many studies on the traits, on the interesting traits of shade trees for managing coffee rust. But we believe first that the shade cover has to be moderate, maybe 30%, something like that. Shade is very useful for many things, but for managing coffee rust, it's better to have a low low shade cover. And we believe that we need short trees, not very tall trees, because when we have tall trees, what happens is that the kinetic energy of the raindrops is higher. The trees intercept the raindrops, accumulate water on the leaves, and then the drop that falls down is very big, and the impact on the leaf is very strong, and that will contribute to the dispersal of the leaves, of the spores. So this is a very documented. So better to have short trees, better to have smaller leaves, maybe lobed leaves with not in order that the leaves cannot accumulate a lot of water, you know, and to avoid these big drops that will have high kinetic energy. And flexible leaves also, for the same reason. If the leaves are not flexible, they will accumulate more water. But we need to work on that. See, these are hypotheses, you know, and we want to verify that all these traits are useful for managing coffee rust.
For anybody who's interested too, I did earlier link an article that was published in World Coffee Research, kind of talking about these just interesting ways to balance shade and how it affects coffee press. And you can find that in the chat box that I linked to that article, and it's linked to the full study that that article was written off of at the bottom of that article too. And I know that there is ongoing research for this. Another question too was about fertilizer, actually, because you said that fertilization is proper fertilization application and good fertilization seems to be a really good method of decreasing the effect of coffee rust on farms. So does it make a difference of what kind of fertilizer? The specific question was organic versus commercial.
Well, it is still a subject of research, you know, and we know that there is a relationship. We don't know exactly the nature of this relationship, and the study I showed is maybe the first one that illustrates that there is a clear relationship between the number of spores that are produced by the rust and the nitrogen fertilization. So it is very surprising, because normally with obligate parasites, nitrogen, on the contrary, enhances the production of spores, because the leaf is in better shape, and the rest take a benefit of this better shape. But in this case, they found the opposite relationship. So it is very interesting. In general, what we think is that good fertilization, in accordance with the soil analysis and the expected production, will help the tree to grow better and to grow more. And this growth, by producing more leaves, healthy leaves, will reduce the incidence, which is the relationship or the ratio between the number of infected leaves and the total number of leaves. So this incidence will be reduced because new leaves will appear. So and this growth will also avoid that, or maybe in certain proportion, many branches that with bad fertilization would have died. With a good fertilization, these branch grows. With these branches, despite having many rust, will survive. And the production of the year will not be reduced, and maybe of the other years also. Remember that possibly the main impacts of coffee rust is by killing the branches. When the branch is dead because of the defoliation, the production of the year can be reduced, but also the production of the following years. So the impact of an epidemic is not for 1 year only, is for many years.
A short article again from World Coffee Research on fertilization and coffee rust. And yeah, basically the general conclusion was that a healthy tree is going to be less susceptible. And so that's why the fertilization, having good fertilization is important. And so we are starting to run out of time here, but I would like to address one more question that I saw here about if you can address the virility of different races of coffee leaf rust. We have not yet been able to identify the race of the rust that's present here. I believe, unless there's been an update, I missed the meeting that was yesterday, unfortunately. And so I don't know if you're able to discuss that.
About the virulence of the coffee rust species. And maybe you know that there are many races, about 50 races, known races, but there are many more that have not been described really. So, the races, the different rust races have the ability, some of these races have the ability to break down the resistance of coffee materials. So it is very important to know the races you have in your islands in order to plant resistant materials and not susceptible ones. Maybe they are resistant in other regions, but maybe susceptible in Hawaii. So it is important to know that. If I understand well, you have mainly Katuai cultivars in Hawaii. And these cultivars are susceptible to almost all the races that are known. And one of the most aggressive race is the simple one, the simplest one, the race 2, which has only one virulent gene. So like a key that can open the door of the coffee plant, and imagine the door is a resistant gene, and your materials in Hawaii have only one door, and so with only one key, the rust can enter the leaf and cause an infection. And this race, the race 2, is aggressive actually. So more complicated races with more keys that are able to open more doors are not necessarily more aggressive. They can infect more coffee genotypes, more coffee varieties, but maybe they are not more aggressive than race 2 on Katuai and Katura. So, but it is important to know what are the races you have in Hawaii in order to determine what are the best coffee materials for your condition. Not sure I have an answer.
We're looking, and it's why we're also, HCA is not yet really bringing forth any recommendations for rust-resistant varieties because we do not yet know the race of this coffee leaf rust. And so that, again, as you said, the different varieties that are resistant depend on the races that we have present here. And as Jacques was saying, though, Katura, Typica, Katuai are extremely susceptible to all races of rust, and those are definitely the majority of what we have here in Hawaii. I am just going to stop us there. We will probably, Jacques, ask you follow-up questions in an email, see if we can just distribute that through our email list for this event, just because we have run out of time. But I want to thank you so much for your time and the information that you shared today. As we before we move on to Andrea.
Okay. Thank you very much for your attention, and you can write to me if you have more questions. Thank you. I have to leave, so because I have other commitments. Have a good webinar.
Thank you very much. Aloha.
Bye.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for all those questions. I hope that was helpful and informative. And like I said, we will be following up with Jacques with some more questions via email, and we'll distribute that to the list of attendees here. So next up, we have a very familiar face for everybody here in Hawaii, Andrea Kawabata. I don't know if she really needs a bio introduction, but I'm going to give that anyway. She's our Associate Extension Agent here with the CTAHR, works out of the Kona Extension Office and provides outreach to the coffee, tropical fruit, and nut industries. Since 2011, she's been coordinating and providing coffee berry for integrated pest management recommendations to growers throughout the state. Andrea conducts research that is applicable to farmers and partners with other agencies to provide growers with educational opportunities and research-based information. And she has been in contact with a lot of coffee producers here on Hawaii Island, kind of helping people, you know, sending texts and people sending her photos and calling her. And so we thought that she'd be just a really good source of information here, just about some of the availability of fungicide and sanitary farm practices to start taking immediately if you have not yet already started, really just tightening up your sanitation protocol on your farms. So Andrea, if you want to just go ahead and take that away. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeline. Is my mic okay for you guys? Coming clear. Okay, great. Thank you to HCA for putting on this webinar series as well for today. Please, if you guys are able to, also there's crop insurance webinar with KCFA at 4 o'clock this afternoon. So a lot of opportunities to learn, and I will share my screen. I don't think you'll be able to see me, but you should be able to see my screen once it pops up. Oh, okay, that's fine. All right, Malin, is this coming up? My first slide?
Yes, you can see it.
Madeline, can you see my first slide?
We can see it.
You're so garbled. I'm hoping I'm not going to be garbled. All right. So my topic is going to be about managing coffee leaf rust spread and also managing pesticide resistance with the available fungicides that we have to combat coffee leaf rust. So in managing the spread, we kind of need to know where we've found coffee leaf rust so far in the islands. And right now, just Big Island and Maui have been known to be infested with CLR. So within the Big Island, we don't know about other areas outside of Kona, but for now, we definitely have positives in the Holualoa area as well as Honaunau. So it's extending from North Holualoa into South Holualoa. We have a tentative positive in Kainaliu just down the road from our extension office, as well as another tentative positive in the Rock Bottom Road area of Honaunau. On Maui, there's been positives in Kahakuloa, so that's the northwest side of the island. And then moving east, Iao Valley, Haiku, Kula, and then down in Ulupalakua. So basically, if you're in these areas that we know where rust has been found and identified, you should be taking the precautions to look through your entire farm immediately. You should also be taking precautions to reduce the spread by following the sanitation protocols. And I'll explain a little bit more about that in the next couple slides. Just because you're not in these areas, please do not also think that you don't have rust. Make it a point to get out there and look. If you see anything suspicious, please report it so we can have it identified positively. So there are these sanitation protocols provided by USDA, and I have them available online. So if you head up to the hawaiicoffeeed.com website, there's a tab there for coffee leaf rust, and if you just hover your cursor over that, it'll bring down a listing, and at the top of that listing you'll find the sanitation protocols, and just click on that. It'll take you to the next website that has the information, and I've underlined some of it that to me is a little more important to read through and remember. This was adopted from USDA's protocol for rapid ohia death sanitation protocols. So the first is, you know, think about it that you could be the one with rust on your farm, even though it hasn't been found, and other people could also have rust. So we don't want to transfer it from one place to the other. So please make sure you're decontaminating yourself before as well as after you leave your farm or another farm and go from one place to the other. You can use 70% alcohol or a higher percentage of rubbing alcohol to clean tools, your shoes, and other items that you might take into the field with you. If you're going to use a bleach solution, it should be a freshly prepared, at least 10% solution of bleach and water. Just remember that if you're going to use these to sanitize tools, it is corrosive, so you'll want to make sure that you're oiling your tools after you dip or soak them into this Clorox solution. For clothing, hats, and other materials that you're wearing into the farms, into your own farm, you'll want to wash them with detergent as well as hot water, and you can also dry them with high heat to kill the rust spores. If you're driving a vehicle or vehicles through the farms or near to areas that have coffee, you'll want to make sure your vehicles are cleaned, and power washing is recommended if that's possible. And with all other pesticides or any products that could be dangerous to human health, to your skin, or could ruin equipment, please follow all the label directions that are provided. So again, this can be found online, or if you want to, you can shoot me an email and I can send this to you, as well as any other publications that are available at this time. All right, so Jacques told us a bit about how coffee leaf rust can be invasive to farms, how quickly it can get bad on farms depending on our different situations with the environment. And because our only fungicides are the contact fungicides, early detection is going to be really important using scouting and monitoring. We need to find the infection at a infestation rate of under 5% in order for these contact fungicides to work effectively in managing coffee leaf rust. Unfortunately, we do not have any systemics at this time, although research is looking into it, and hopefully we'll have some available in the near future. To spray and kill the spores and reduce the impact of coffee leaf rust, it's important, again, catch it early, because if we let it fester in the farm, your current production as well as future production is affected, and that's also something that Jacques had mentioned. So right now, our varieties are all susceptible to coffee leaf rust. So our only choice is to follow this yellow brick road. Unfortunately, it's not a positive thing. So we'll need to monitor for the disease and find that incidence threshold that's under 5% and use that threshold to start spraying with the foliar fungicides that we have approved for use in Hawaii. Now I wanted to show you this slide. It was taken from a publication by Zembalem. It's a publication from 2016, and it gives you an idea of what we might see in Hawaii. Now this is Brazil, and the bars are going to be rain. The line is going to be minimum temperature in Brazil at this particular farm that they monitored. The shaded area with the yellow dots is going to be coffee leaf rust incidence on that farm, and this chart is showing about a year and a half, almost 2 years of rust cycle on this particular farm. And I'm going to read you something from this article that helps to explain this chart. So it says that in Brazil, the temporal progress of coffee rust in most growing regions during high yield years is as follows. So you'll see this high yield here in the first part, and then you'll see a lower yield in this second section. Okay, so disease onset occurs in December to January, increases exponentially during March to May, and peaks in June to July, depending on the altitude. After harvest, the intensity of the disease declines due to cooler temperatures and leaf fall. In high yield years, incidence may reach 90% in susceptible varieties under favorable weather. The rate of leaf defoliation, so probably somewhere around here after the harvest, the rate of leaf defoliation at harvest depends on rust incidence level, natural leaf senescence, and operation of manual or mechanical harvesting. In a year subsequent to an epidemic year, so they're talking about this lower production year. In a year subsequent to an epidemic year, because production is low, rust incidence may not reach 25% even under favorable weather conditions. So it kind of gives you an idea of what we may expect. And what I've done is, because Brazil is on the southern hemisphere of the earth, the months are a little bit different from ours. So I've interchanged the months from the original graph with our months that may coincide with the different rain patterns that we have. So typically we start seeing our rain in the spring and then through the summer, particularly in Kona. And so we may see this rust incidence increasing over the harvest, reducing after pruning, as well as through the drier seasons in the winter. And then you'll see it kind of ramp up again through the spring and then into the summer. And just to give you an idea of the minimum temperatures from the Brazil graph, they're looking at somewhere between about 50 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit for their minimum temperatures. And that's definitely something that we can hit here in Hawaii. So this is just an example, and it's not exactly what we're going to see. We kind of, in a sense, have to wait and see what we're going to experience. But just be aware that rain does, help to germinate those coffee leaf rust spores, and then we will typically see the rust incidence increasing from then. So for the monitoring, there's a few different methods of monitoring that I've seen in the publications, and I pulled out a couple of different monitoring schemes that seem to be simpler. It does not necessarily mean that it's better. We still would need to also determine which method is best for Hawaii. But I'll kind of explain to you with these next couple of slides of these different methods. So the first is from Ikafe, and it is to first randomly select 10 trees per acre through your field. You're going to locate a branch from the middle of the tree. You're going to count the total number of leaves on that branch, including those with the rust symptoms. And then you're going to go back to that same branch, and you're going to count the number of leaves showing rust symptoms on that branch. So it kind of reminds you of the monitoring system that we use for coffee berry borer, except you're not counting berries, but you're now counting leaves. And then you can use this calculation to come up with rust incidence. So let's say you've done the monitoring through your acre. You've counted a total of 150 leaves. Of that, 7 of them have rust symptoms. You have a 4.7% rust incidence. So it's telling you you should be spraying. The second monitoring example is to randomly select 10 trees per plot. That could be within your whole farm. But again, the more leaves you sample, the better, I guess, result you're getting. So let's say a plot is an acre. Then you randomly collect 10 leaves per tree from the lower third of the plant. Remember, a lot of the rust starts at the lower third of the plant. So this one is saying instead of the midsection of the tree, you're going to collect your 10 leaves at the lower third of the plant. These leaves are also going to come from a branch that's from the leaves that are in the middle of the branch. So they're saying the third or fourth pair of leaves on that branch, you would take at least one. And then you're going to collect a total of 100 leaves per plot or per your acre. You're going to count the number of leaves that have coffee leaf rust symptoms, and then you're going to use simple division to get your rust incidence. So if you've got 4 leaves displaying coffee leaf rust symptoms out of 100 that you've collected, you've got a 4% incidence and trigger to spray. The publications also recommend sampling at the beginning of the rainy season, so sometime in the spring, as well as at the beginning of harvest, just to double check the incidence of rust and to see if you need to continue or start spraying again. So these are some of the symptoms that you might be looking for in your trees. Again, the symptoms, especially when it's early, it's starting off in that lower third of the canopy on the trees. Some of the symptoms show up as yellow spots on the upper side of the leaves, but the real, I guess, visuals that you should be looking for are going to be on the bottom of the leaves, the undersides, and you'll see them as either these yellow or orange yellow to nearly orange colored spots. The spores tend to be a little darker, like an orange colored powder within those spots. And typically when it's in early development, you do not see that brown spot in the center of the spots. On this bottom right-hand photo, that is a progressed and advanced spot. So you do see some of that necrosis in the middle of that spot, but you also see the powdery spores surrounding that necrosis area. Some of the newly formed spots may not show the spores. So don't always be looking for those orange spores, but keep an eye out. If you do think that you've got rust, please report it. And you can find some other photos at the coffee website that's provided at the bottom of this web page. So research says that the percent incidence of coffee leaf rust is related to the leaf area with rust spots and also related to the number of sporulating spots per leaf. So these photos just kind of give you a visual of what that means. The lower the percent of leaves with coffee leaf rust, the lower number of spots typically on the leaves, and the lower number of spores within the farm. And the opposite tends to be true, where there's a higher percent of leaves with coffee leaf rust, greater number of leaf spots on the leaves, and then also a greater number of spores in the farm. So again, it's really important to catch rust early in infection, and particularly for the contact fungicides when incidence is under 5%. So what do you do if you think you have rust on your farm? You can submit photos through Department of Agriculture's field guide, as well as use their submission form to submit any potential coffee leaf rust suspect leaves. You can email it to them. The email is there provided on this screen, as well as put down suspect coffee leaf rust under the subject. You can also give them a call if you have questions. If you would also like to, you can send me photos and your questions on coffee leaf rust to my email, and you can also text me or send me photos through text as well. If we still aren't sure whether you have coffee leaf rust and you would like your samples submitted, here are some of the directions to do so. You would collect the leaves with these symptoms. Make sure you're using a clean, unused Ziploc. You place these leaves in the Ziploc, or you can place them between a couple of clean paper towels and then place both the paper towels and your leaves into the Ziploc as it's shown in the photo. If you're in the field, you can take a cooler with you and a little pack of ice or an ice pack and a little towel. So you'll cover the towel over the ice pack and then lay your Ziploc with the leaves on top of that just to keep it cool but not on direct cold. You can also refrigerate the leaves in the Ziploc and then head over to the extension office that's closest to you, and you can have them submitted through our ADSC. Unfortunately, Brian is going to retire at the end of December, so he will only be accepting samples until December 18. If you've contacted me or HDOA, we may also contact you back directly, especially if you have definite coffee leaf rust. We may be able to be in touch with you and collect the leaf samples from you directly away from your farm and have it submitted to USDA if they require additional leaf samples around the islands. So also, what do you do if coffee leaf rust is identified on your farm? The recommendation is to spray as soon as possible with the approved fungicides. Continue to maintain field sanitation as well as the sanitation practices going from farm to farm. Keep your weeds under control, and that will help you to get better coverage, especially on the branches that are closer to the ground. If you're going to remove any heavily infected branches or leaves, you can apply for an ag burn permit, or you can also compost and cover these leaves so that the spores cannot escape out and re-enter the field. I do recommend that you spray the fungicide before doing any kind of branch or leaf removal. And because the spores can live up to about 6 weeks away from trees, if you're going to cover them, keep that covered for at least 6 weeks, possibly even 2 months, just to make sure that the spores will die under cover and composting. You might consider stump pruning in larger areas at the end of your harvest, especially for CBB control and to include coffee leaf rust control. You might also consider removing some of the lower laterals during pruning, and that will help potentially reduce splash from spores getting back up into the tree from the ground or leaves during rain and getting back onto the lower leaves of the branches, as well as by increasing the height of the skirts. It may help you with the spray coverage. And also to improve or maintain your tree health, Jacques kept mentioning about keeping healthy trees and how healthy trees tolerated rust a lot better than trees that weren't fertilized and were not healthy. So I've created a spray publication as we just have a few different types of spray fungicides that are approved for use in Hawaii and on coffee. And this publication is available in English as well as Spanish. So they're both available online, or if you would like me to send them to you, just shoot me an email. So it goes over basically some of the symptoms of coffee leaf rust on the first page and why we need to suppress the coffee leaf rust at these lower incidence rates. Basically, if you're allowing coffee leaf rust to remain in the farm unmanaged, you're looking at very high losses, not just in the current year, but also in future years, and potential losses of trees and complete yield loss if that tree is dead. On the second page, it goes through the proper use, and I would highly recommend only using approved pesticides. It is a legal thing. And I also will continually talk about the label. These two that are underlined are very important. So please make sure you guys are following the label for any fungicides that you're using, as well as any other pesticides that you're using on the farm. And because we have very few products to use currently, we do not want to lose any of those tools, and we also do not want to create resistance by coffee leaf rust to any of these fungicides. So rotating the different pesticides is going to be really important. Making sure that we're covering up and protecting ourselves as well as the workers with proper PPEs or personal protective equipment is important, as well as if you're spraying during an initial, infection, and this is going to be your first spray. Researchers are saying to lower the pressure of the sprayer if possible, and that way the highly pressured sprayers are not then being used to spray and continually spread the spores in the field. So use a low pressure sprayer, especially for that initial application. Calibrating your sprayer is also important. It'll help you determine how much water you need to use for the mixture per acre, and it'll also help you to determine how much product to use per gallon of solution. So if you've never done that before, there are some publications in the literature citation section, or you can also contact me for information on how to calibrate your sprayer. So good coverage is really important in the control of coffee leaf rust because the spores are found on the underside of the leaves. We are needing to spray on the entire canopy, but also with focus on the underside of the leaves to kill those spores. And again, because it is a contact fungicide, once those spores germinate into the leaves, it is not going to be killing coffee leaf rust that's inside of the leaves, just what is on the outside, and particularly that's going to be the spores. Field sanitation is also important. So continue with the pruning after the harvest season, the desuckering so you can get good spray coverage, as well as weed control. Again, I'm going to repeat, the rotation of the different fungicides is going to be really important. And this part of the document talks about frac groups. So I'm going to pull up the chart that's on the last page. And this section of the chart in column 3 shows you the different frac groups. And basically it's so that we know which products to either alternate with or rotate with. So we've actually color coded the different frac groups, and you can see 3 there. There's the blue group, the yellow group, and the pink group. And in the frac group, you'll see that they've got different numbers or codes. So 44, M1, and then BMO2. So let's say you're spraying Coside 3000 for your first application. You're going to want to move to either the blue or the pink group. So your next application may be Serenade. And then you can go back to the yellow group. Or you may choose to rotate between all 3 groups. But it's just really important to rotate so that we do not create pesticide resistance and have a more difficult time controlling coffee leaf rust. Okay, so for use of different fungicides and any kind of pesticides, you also want to watch out for phytotoxicity. You might see this as leaf burning or maybe spots or burning on the fruit, as well as sometimes fruit drop or leaf drop can also occur. And sometimes that can happen during applications when it's really dry or when it's really hot. We'll also want to avoid heavy rain, of course, because it can wash off the fungicides from the leaves. To get better coverage, you might add a spreader to the solution. If you know it's going to rain, or lightly, you may want to add a sticker to the solution. And for coverage, as well as to get better adhesion onto the leaves and the berries, you may want to add a combination that has both spreader and sticker. And while you're spraying, you might also include foliar fertilizers. Bovaria can be included with the mix. I know Jacques mentioned that they tend to keep the fungicides as well as any Bovaria products separate. In communications with Bioworks, they have tested the compatibility so that there's no clumping, there's no separation out of Bovaria and various fungicides, but they have not evaluated the impact on, let's say, the efficacy of the fungicide nor have they done the field work on any plant phytotoxicity or how it impacts Bavaria in the field. And we hope to really clarify that with some future field work done in Hawaii. But they do have a compatibility chart available online, and the chart at the end of this document also gives you an idea of which Bavaria products they have tested and which ones they say are compatible with the different fungicides. Again, please make sure you guys are following the labels, read through them, because some of the products that you may want to add are not going to be compatible with the different fungicides. If you're controlling anthracnose as well as Cercospora on your fields, all of the products that are listed in Table 1 are useful in controlling these two diseases. However, if you look at the labels on a lot of these products, the rate for controlling anthracnose is higher than the rate for controlling Cercospora as well as coffee leaf rust. So if you're trying to control anthracnose, make sure you are using that higher rate. If you're using that higher rate, you're also controlling all three of these fungi. So in a sense, just adding a little more product if you need it to control anthracnose can be a helpful thing in controlling all the diseases that we presently have in coffee, and to help protect and control for coffee leaf rust. Some of the other considerations, please again read the label, is going to be your re-entry interval. A product like Coside 3000 has a 48-hour re-entry time period. So once you finish spraying, you should not re-enter that field or allow anybody else to re-enter the field for 48 hours. Some of them do have warnings against phytotoxicity, especially with low and possibly high pH of the solutions. In addition, there's minimum and maximum rates per application. If you're using below the minimum rates, it is a violation of product use, and you may also be increasing the possibility of pesticide resistance. If you're using over the maximum rates allowed, again, that's going to be a violation of the product use, and that becomes an increased cost to you. There are maximum applications per year that's noted on the label as well, or per season. If you're going above these maximum applications, again, it's a violation and it's an increased cost to the producer. So again, please follow the label recommendations and use the products correctly. So on this final page, I just wanted to acknowledge Stuart Nakamoto, Lisa Key, Suzanne Schreiner, as well as the Department of Agriculture, who have reviewed this document and helped provide feedback so that we could get it together and get it out to industry as soon as possible. If you're interested in some of the literature that's cited in this publication, the links are there. And again, on the last page, it shows Table 1, and so it gives you a listing of the different fungicides that are available for use to control coffee leaf rust on coffee in Hawaii. If you receive the PDF document, you can click on the blue underlined part that says label, and you can pull up the label for the different products so you have it on hand. Again, under this column, it'll tell you whether BioWorks has determined the fungicide compatible with Botanigard, Microtrol, and their other Bavaria products. And then also it'll give you an estimate of the cost per product per acre. And it'll give you the cost at the low rate as well as the high rate for controlling coffee leaf rust. So in summary, just to kind of pull it all together, it's really important to get out there, look at your farms, go through your entire farm. We do not know where rust is going to show up and on which trees in your farm. So please walk through your entire farm as soon as you can, especially if you have not yet. We do see rust coming up in the lower third of your trees, so that's somewhere that you might want to focus on a little bit more. We do see them on seedlings as well on the ground. It's critical to catch rust leaf incidents at under 5% for contact fungicides to work more effectively. If you're finding any suspect leaf rust samples, please submit that and report them to HDOA, or you can report them to me. If we do have them identified as coffee leaf rust, begin your controls immediately. Faster you start controlling it, the better you have that potential of controlling it at a lower level and having it impact your coffee and your future coffee less. Again, please rotate or alternate the use of these approved fungicides in the different FRAC groups. And, you know, we want to make sure that we have the use of these pesticides for as long as we possibly can, especially until we have a resistant variety or varieties available for planting. And as Jacques said, tree health is going to be really important. So we want to maintain the health of our farm and to fertilize, keep pruning. Don't forget about CBB. Field sanitation for CBB is also coming up really soon for us with strip picking. And we also want to help not transport coffee leaf rust from farm to farm. So maintaining the sanitation protocols prior to leaving the farms, as well as leaving a farm or going to a farm, sorry. So my contact information is there on the bottom of the screen. I will provide this presentation to HCA, and if you would like, I can also send it to you in PDF form following today. So please be in touch if you have any questions or if you want to submit samples or photos. I'll try and be here for you as best as I can. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Others hear me? You can hear me? Okay, great. We had a couple of questions come up. One that I believe you did address early on when you're looking at the, we want to be able to identify coffee leaf rust before when it's below 5% infection. And just a clarification question was 5% of leaves or trees, but I think that was answered in those collection methods, or the monitoring methods that you went over. But just in case, I don't know if there is further clarification you can provide on that.
Yeah, so there are the couple of methods that I had mentioned, and basically it is going to be a percentage of the leaves that are either collected or counted. Whether you choose to do the middle of the tree method or that bottom third of the tree method, there may be other methods out there as well for monitoring. These seem to be a little simpler to understand for me and to maybe transfer the information to farmers to attempt to use on their farm. I'm hoping Lisa's going to have some really good photos of early symptoms. A lot of the photos that I had on the screen were more advanced, and I'm hoping her photos will really show growers what to look for for early symptoms that may not show the rust spores.
11:30, just to let everybody know. And then more kind of clarification on fungicide use. Is there a recommended frequency or schedule, and is that included in that document that you shared?
So actually, the research is saying not to spray on a schedule and to use the monitoring. You know, it's really going to be dependent for each farm and the different locations. Remember that dry weather is not conducive to spore germination also. So there may be no sense in spraying if we're having dry weather. So it's going to be important to get out there and keep monitoring your fields. If you're already seeing it, you should be spraying. You might want to give a couple of applications, follow the labels, but you can contact me if you are seeing rust already, and I can give you some more details and I can help you calculate the rates as well, as long as I get some of that information from the spray calibration. But there really is no set, you need to spray every so many weeks or anything like that I can provide growers at this point in time. It's really going to be dependent on the monitoring.
You'll be monitoring your entire farm on a regular basis to understand what the infection rate may or may not be.
Yeah, so monitor now, get out there into your field now. And then if you're not seeing it on your farm, it doesn't mean that it's not there. So, you want to get back out into your farm, every few weeks or so. Some pubs that I have read say at least monthly you want to monitor.
Awesome.
So you want to catch it early.
We are going a little bit over time, and I apologize if people need to leave, I understand, but there are two more questions that I wanted to address here. One of them was not really a question about moving green coffee it is a question about movement of green coffee, not from farm management. But for example, all coffee going into Hawai'i has to be frozen to control for CBB. Is there any evidence about coffee leaf rust spores being killed by being frozen as well? Or is that something that we're not sure about yet?
They tend to tolerate cold more than heat. I wouldn't be able to provide any information on freezing and control of rust using that. That would be a Department of Agriculture regulation also. So if that is not something they're allowing for the control of rust, then freezing would not be an option. So hopefully Kevin will be able to answer a question like that.
Hopefully we can address that in that presentation with Kevin. Lastly, if you can address the question about mixing microtrol with Closide 3000.
So according to BioWorks, it's tank mixable. So it's the same product basically made as Botanigard. So when they say that the compatibility chart for Botanigard is provided, they also cover microtrol as well as the wettable powders under the term of Botanigard compatibility. So yeah.
One quick question: do you know if the fungicides triazole or strobilurin are approved in Hawaii? They're not.
No, we do. So those are systemic, and we currently do not have any systemics that are approved for use on coffee. Only the contact fungicides, and the ones that are listed on that chart are the ones that can be used.
And I know that the approval for systemic fungicides is something that is being worked on to help our coffee producers. It is a process, unfortunately, and so it may be a little bit of time until that happens. But hopefully we'll be able to announce some more information about systemic fungicide use in Hawaii. Approved fungicide fungicide use in Hawaii. That's everything we have for this session. I know we went a little bit over, but again, you have Andrea's contact information. We will be sharing, I believe everybody has Jacques' contact information as well. Like I said, we are happy to email him with those leftover questions that we didn't get to address earlier today. And it seems like just really good sanitation methods are going to be helpful for a lot of coffee producers. I actually wanted to share something, and I don't know if, Andrea, you have an opinion on this, but this was shared to me by a coffee producer in Costa Rica, and I don't know if you've seen these before, but to use these in different areas when leaving and entering coffee fields. And so they're sanitizing mats that you can basically put sanitizer liquid into. And they said that in Costa Rica, they were using and still use them all over the place. So I don't know if this is something that CTAHR has been looking into at all as well, but yeah, just kind of another quick tip that I wanted to add in there. But thank you, everybody, and we'll see you all in about an hour.
Thank you.